My name is Sofia, and in this video I'm going to talk about the 4 attachment styles. Attachment styles are our relational wiring of how we view ourselves and view the rest of the world. So this has to do with our romantic partners, with our friends, with our co-workers, and it's made up of 2 components. And the first component is, how do you fundamentally view yourself? Do you think that you are fundamentally worthy of love? Do you think that you are fundamentally a trustworthy and a good partner? Do you feel good about yourself in general? And the second component is, how do you view other people and relationships in general? So do you think that other people are generally trustworthy? Do you think that they can bring you something of substance? Do you think that they are going to be generally empathic and generally vulnerable with you? And how do you view relationships in general? Do you think that most relationships are terrible and just not worth being in? Or do you feel that people are happy in relationships, and there's some relationships that are good and some relationships that are worse? And so with using these 2 components, we mix and match. So the preoccupied attached person, otherwise known as the anxiously attached, they view themselves as unworthy fundamentally, unlovable. They might not be very happy with themselves, struggle from low self-esteem, and they actually want relationships. So they feel pretty bad about themselves, but pretty good about the idea of being in a relationship. That would be the preoccupied, anxiously attached. Then there is the dismissing or the avoidant attached. And that would be the person that feels generally pretty good about themselves, like, yeah, I have a lot to give, who wouldn't want to be with me? But they feel that people don't bring that much substance. They feel like people bring in maybe too many emotions, and that they're going to distract them from their goals, that they might just be better off alone. Usually they think of their partners as very needy, very insecure. They're uncomfortable with their own emotions. They don't know how to tolerate them very well, and thus they're also uncomfortable with the emotions of other people. And these folks, the dismissing, avoidantly attached, they use a variety of strategies to block themselves out of emotions that have to do with anything, relationships, or otherwise things in their life. Then there is the fearful folks, and these people have a low view of themselves, and they also have a low view of others and relationships in general. So usually in relationships, they act in very confusing ways. They have negative light. These are the people that tend to view themselves the worst, and also end up viewing their partners in very negative light. And then the 4th one is the secure, which make up about 50-60% of the population. So these people feel pretty good about themselves. They feel pretty good about the idea of being in a relationship. They feel like generally people are trustworthy, and they feel like if any conflict occurs or something happens in their relationship, they can overcome it. So even if the relationship falls apart or something negative happens, they feel like they're going to be okay. And what I actually find also really interesting about this statistic is that there's about a 50% divorce rate in the country, and it's interesting that the secure people make up about 50-60% of the population, and with the insecure attachments kind of make up the rest. I haven't really looked into it, but I just think it's a quite interesting statistic that it's half and half. And so let's go further into what these attachment styles are and how the people think about themselves and the views that they have, and then also how this manifests in a relationship. So with the preoccupied attached, person, this is the person that thinks pretty lowly about themselves, but really wants to be in a relationship, they are going to look for a sense of security. There's two things that happen with the preoccupied attached. So, so these people, they feel pretty bad about themselves, right? And so they are either going to find partners, they're going to validate that negative self-view. So maybe partners that aren't very kind to them, not very empathic, maybe not fully committing to them, kind of like stringing them along. They're going to become preoccupied with their partners because in their mind, if they're ever going to get the validation of this person, then they feel like something with them is going to change and they're going to feel better about themselves and also prove to the world that they are worthy. And so there's a lot of anxiety about searching and finding the validation of that person. Or two, they find a partner that actually loves them very much, tells them how precious they are, makes them feel very loved, tries to do everything possible to make them feel this way. And they enter into what we call a cognitive dissonance, where they become very confused. They're like, well, I don't think I'm very worthy of love. I don't understand why this person wants to spend all this time with me and tells me all these wonderful things and is creating all these romantic dates. It's just weird. What's wrong with this individual? And so they can't believe it. And it creates so much anxiety within them that they actually start building narratives about why this person is with them because it doesn't match their view of the world. And then they start focusing on those narratives. And also, they're very hypervigilant and they're looking for cues of rejection. So let's say if their partner doesn't text message them right away, or maybe doesn't call them very often, they don't think of it like, oh, maybe he or she is busy, or maybe they don't like to talk on the phone very much. No, they immediately think that it's because their partner isn't that interested in them, and they're not that worthy of being called or being responded to immediately. They can become very jealous, they can become very suspicious, and they can work against themselves in a relationship. So for example, they can constantly check their partner's phone, let's say, and sort of violate that sense of privacy. But the reason why they're doing that is just because they want to feel secure. They want to release their anxiety that their partner might be cheating on them or is interested in somebody else. So they're going to develop strategies to constantly look for validation from their partner, like, no, I do love you, I'm being faithful, I'm being honest with you. And developing those strategies themselves can actually push the other person away. So they're looking for closeness, they're looking for safety, but the way that they start behaving in the relationship infuses anxiety into the relationship, causing their partner to go the other way. So if their partner's sense of privacy is constantly being violated by checking their phone or whatnot, then that could be a deal breaker for some people. And so unfortunately, with the anxiously attached, this cycle can continue. Sexually, the anxiously attached people are afraid to talk about sex a lot of the times. For women, sometimes the anxiously attached, they use sex as a validation. So if they feel like their partner constantly wants to have sex with them, then they feel validated. If their partner doesn't, then they begin to feel very unattractive, very unvalidated. They begin to think there's something wrong with the relationship. And oftentimes they can't actually relax and enjoy themselves fully sexually. And for the anxiously attached men, they usually focus on the pleasure of their female partner. And they also have a lot of discomfort talking about it with their partner. Unfortunately, too, the anxiously attached people can sometimes be quite promiscuous because they're looking for validation. And so they can get engaged in a lot of short-term relationships And what that does is actually create more anxiety in them, because they engage in short-term relationships, but they're not finding this kind of long-term fulfillment. So they feel like the people they're getting involved with, they're not good enough for those people. And there's a cycle. The more people they engage in the short-term relationships, the more they feel like there's nobody really out there for them. So it kind of becomes a trap and a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's the anxious, attached, or preoccupied folks. Then there are the dismissive, or the avoidant attached, otherwise known as. So these are actually the people that are really kind of celebrated in society too. They're very autonomous. They believe that they can do everything on themselves. They don't really need anyone. They're very independent. They can also be very responsible kind of people, very desirable partners. And the thing with these folks is that they feel pretty good about themselves, but they feel pretty negative about potential partners or relationships in general. And this comes from a feeling that no one will really understand them, and that nobody is actually going to be really good enough to support them. So like, why do I even need relationships? It's just too much work. And also other people in relationships, they bring in their own stressors, their own emotional states. And for the dismissing partner, that is very overwhelming. And the reason it's overwhelming is because the dismissing person has difficulty feeling their own emotions and being able to self-regulate them. So they come up with a ton of strategies to block themselves away from their emotions. And also, this is with the dismissing, also with anxious or any insecure attachment style, emotions are a huge part of why the attachment style is insecure. And a lot of the times, the insecure attached folks can use things like food or alcohol or sex, these kind of strategies to help numb emotions. So it's very difficult, very uncomfortable. A lot of people with the insecure attachment style actually don't know how they feel, and they mix thoughts and feelings a lot of the times, or anxiety and feelings a lot of the times. And they, especially with the dismissing people, they do everything possible to reduce their emotional state, to numb it out. So in a relationship, the dismissing partner is usually going to think of their partner as too emotional, too needy, insecure. So whenever there's a strong emotion of any kind infused into the relationship, infused into the dismissing partner, they just want to run for the hills. They're just like, I don't want to deal with this. And they have a very kind of take it or leave it personality. Like it's, you're either going to accept me like this or you're not. And they have a quite easy time breaking up the relationship, or at least they think they have a quite easy time breaking up the relationship and moving on, because they use these strategies, these distancing strategies. So in a relationship, they are likely, one of their strategies is to focus on the negatives of their partner. So it could be physical appearance, like they can kind of look at their partner and point out, this isn't good enough, that isn't good enough, and then they're going to put that in their head and kind of think about it. It could be any kind of personality traits, where they're going to look for personality traits, and then they're going to create a narrative of how this personality trait is going to affect them negatively, the dismissive themselves negatively. And then they're going to put that in their head and kind of think about it. And they're going to think about all the different ways that the relationship can go wrong, and all the different ways that a partner isn't good enough and is not actually bringing them any value. And so they create this narrative in their head, and what that does is that kind of blocks their positive emotions towards their partner, and it also just reinforces this idea that I'm better off alone, or this particular person isn't good enough for me. So the interesting thing about the dismissive partner is when you look at research that's done on infants, and the infants that have the anxious or the preoccupied style of attachment, because this gets formed very early on, if the caregiver is absent, they're going to do, they're going to cry, they're going to scream, they're going to act in all sorts of kind of anxious ways in order to get their caregiver to come back. And even when their caregiver comes back, they're going to it's going to take them a long time to just calm down. Now with the dismissive infants, they're going to act like real cool, like their caregiver came back, they're usually going to turn their face in a different direction. They're not going to cry very much. But when they measure their heart rhythm, it's actually the dismissing or the avoidant infant whose heart is just like beating out of their chest. So actually, the dismissing people, they built ways to kind of like act real cool and just kind of like, talk to the hands kind of people and move on. But internally, physically, they're actually extremely activated. Their nervous system is extremely activated. And in both cases, actually in all three insecure attachment style, people are much more likely to develop physical manifestations as well, like getting sick very frequently. If you're experiencing constant anxiety, if you're experiencing a lot of these negative physical states, then more likely to, catch colds and have other physical manifestations. So that's the other really important reason to look at your attachment style and see where you fit in on the quadrant. Is just part of your overall health. And so, with the dismissing folks, they usually minimize their partner sexually. They try to disconnect emotionally because, once again, that can create a deeper bond, right? Like if they're emotionally attached to their partner and sexually attached, so they usually use kind of strategies to avoid. Sometimes they'll choose to use masturbation instead of having sex with their partner, or figure out ways to like not get too into it, because their partner, what value will their partner bring them anyways? So they're probably better off being alone, and they don't want to be seen as kind of like a fool, like to be very vulnerable with somebody else. They don't trust that others will meet their needs. So then the fearful attached, or otherwise known as disorganized, these folks, they both have a low view of themselves and also a low view of the relationship itself. And the fearful attached, they act in very confusing ways, usually very self-destructive to themselves as well as destructive to the relationship. So the fearful folks, they will tend to, for example, want to spend time with their partner, but they're going to come up with a billion things that they can do on their own without their partner, and then they're going to get upset at their partner that their partner doesn't spend enough time with them. Like they feel like maybe their partner should have been more, more into wanting to spend time with them and asking them to maybe, give up whatever plans they already made in order to avoid their partner in the first place. And sexually, these people have a lot of difficulty kind of letting go and engaging with sex and communicating their needs, things like that. And the fearful attached people, they're also so convinced that their partner is definitely unavailable that they view them in the most negative light compared to all the other attachment styles. These are people that can also get aggressive in relationships sometimes, like even physical aggression, violence, things like that. They might create various strategies in order to get their partner to prove that their partner loves them. And those strategies, once again, very similarly to the anxiously attached, can actually cause their partner to run in the opposite direction. And I have included a link below where you can figure out your own attachment style. You can just rate yourself and see where you fit in the spectrum, although you can also just use some journaling exercises to think about your attachment styles. Now, the securely attached people, they have a good view of themselves and a good view of their relationships. So securely attached people, when they come together, they usually are pretty faithful couples, communicate well, they can have problems, but they usually figure it out. And they think about the problems as just problems within the relationship that occur, rather than using character assassinations against their partner, and rather than thinking, oh, like I should never be in a relationship, or I'm not good enough to be in a relationship. They just deal with problems as they come along. They're more able to explain their emotional states. So emotionally, these are the people that can accept the emotions that come to them, and also can figure out how to deal with them. So they use coping strategies as well, but unlike the more insecure people, they are not as likely to use the coping strategies. They can be destructive, such as like using too much alcohol or drugs or sex or eating. They don't go against themselves, they go with themselves, and they're unlikely to be trapped in relationships that are abusive to them as well, because they know that they can be okay of their own, or they'll find a new relationship that works for them, and so they don't get trapped. But by the way, with the fearful avoidance, these are fearful attached. These are the people that are the most likely to be in abusive relationships as well, because they don't know otherwise, and they're also afraid to leave the relationship, and they're very confused. They're not sure if it's them or their partner. They can sometimes accept the faults for themselves, and they just don't know how to be in a relationship when they have a negative view of it. But if they find a partner that's willing to be with them, they'll usually stick in the relationship even if it is abusive. So, well, first of all, with these attachment styles, you don't necessarily have to be securely attached to be happy in a relationship. Not at all. And it's actually, you can change your attachment style, but it's very, very difficult. I'm going to talk about it, and subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to be making videos about each attachment style. I'm going to go further in detail. I'm going to talk all about some of the tools that you can use to change yours. But just to go over it briefly, yeah, you don't need to have a secure attachment style to be happy in a relationship. If you're in a relationship right now and you're happy in it, and let's say both you and your partner have like a preoccupied attachment style, and you're so preoccupied with each other and that's okay with you, then that's fine. Now, if you are in a relationship and you're struggling, you have some problems, probably helps for you and your partner to both find a therapist or work together to see how you can become more secure. Or if you are single and you've had, quite a bit of problems in relationships, maybe you had a lot of short-lived relationships, your relationships tend to end, then it's important to just look at your own attachment style. The way that your attachment can change is two ways. Number one, you need to be in a relationship, because trauma has happened to you when you were in a relationship, and the only way that you can figure it out otherwise is if you are going to be in a relationship again, working on it. So this relationship can be with your romantic partner, it can be with your therapist, it could be with your friends. You never want to feel like, oh, I'm anxiously attached or avoidant. I'm going to avoid relationships until I'm better. Never do that. Never avoid relationships. It doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter how you feel about yourself. You never want to avoid relationships, because when you avoid your relationships, you avoid change. You can only change in a relationship. So never feel like you're not in a right place for a relationship, because you might end up feeling like this for the rest of your life. You might end up feeling like you're never good about relationships. You just have to give it a chance and go after it and meet people and see who you vibe with, because only in relationships, first of all, only in your relationships are these issues highlighted in the first place? If you're not in a relationship, these issues are not going to be highlighted. You're going to go through life as normal. You're not going to think about these things when you avoid relationships, which is actually why the dismissing people avoid relationships a lot of the times, because when they avoid relationships, then these issues are not highlighted for them. They don't need to have the emotional roller coasters. They don't need to have the anxiety. So they feel like they're better off without them. And so that's number one. You can only fix your relational issues in a relationship. And if it's not with a romantic partner, find a therapist. Find a therapist either way. And then the second way is to, well, it's a brief one. There's many ways. But the second way is you definitely want to watch videos like this, learn more about attachment styles, learn more about where you fit in, learn more about where your partner fits in too, because that's going to tell you a lot about what's going on in your relationship. And journal and write out all the thoughts that you have that have to do with relationships in general and that have to do with you. How do you feel about yourself? Do you feel that you're fundamentally worthy of the relationship? Why or why not? What are some things that are negative about you? What are some things that people won't like about you? What are some things that you are afraid of? Do you feel inside that if people got to know you, they wouldn't like you? And what are those things that they can know about you that they wouldn't like? And so, when you write out, if you're anxiously attached, or maybe you feel bad about yourself, when you really write out these thoughts, they're not going to go away. They're going to stay there. But when they do come, you can at least know, like, oh yeah, this is part of my, low self-esteem. This is part of my anxious attachment style. Here we go again. Here are these narratives that I'm kind of telling myself. I already know them. I'm very good friends with them. I'm familiar. I already wrote this out. I feel like I'm fundamentally not good enough. Nobody's going to like me. Things like that, right? And so you can do these kind of journaling exercises to figure out, or maybe you think negatively about relationships, like all relationships suck and people are generally just garbage and are unempathic and they're not really going to bring anywhere. They're just going to bring more trouble to me, more trouble that I have to deal with, and I'd rather not do that. So those are your thoughts. They're not feelings. They're not emotions. You can think about the emotions then, right, that are behind these feelings. The fear, anger, sadness, right? So then that brings you on a deeper level. And here's the thing is that you can think through all of this and you can become very smart and know how your thoughts all fit together and recognize them, but they're not going to change. They're not going to change the way that you feel. They're not going to actually change that anxiety. As a matter of fact, ruminating about this kind of stuff actually can only create more anxiety, because the emotional part of the brain is not exactly connected to our cognitive part of the brain in that way. So, and I'm going to talk about this in my future videos as well, that you need to go a little bit deeper into your emotions, into your core emotions. If you really want to elevate yourself and if you want to create some form of a higher growth process. But your thoughts are also really important to figure out, and they're really important to get to know, and they're really important to kind of box. Like, those thoughts fit into my low self-esteem, these thoughts fit into my anxious attached, my dismissive attached. So when they come around, you are eventually going to have a little bit of an easier time, at least not acting on it. Because you can feel anything and you can think anything, but you don't necessarily need to act on it. So I think this video has gone long enough. I'm going to be making more videos about attachment styles where I'm going to go more into detail about them, talk about different strategies of how to change them, how to become a little bit more open to love, more open to relationships in general. Believe in yourself a little bit more, so don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, check out my workshop for adult children of alcoholics, and if you are interested in gaining a session with me, there's a link below as well where you can schedule it online. And if you're interested in figuring out your attachment styles, maybe working a little bit on that, I can help you with that. And I will see you next time. Have a wonderful week.